Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to a second Mario RPG Boundary Break episode. And if you don't know what Boundary Break is, it's a show where we basically take the camera anywhere we want and we try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. I really had no intention of covering this game. I just wanted to play it. And then I found out that it's in a 3D engine, and of course I had to do a small video on it. This video is going to be mostly a discussion about how this game works and operates, but there are a couple things here and there that you might not have ever seen because we can manipulate the camera. So I hope that sounds like a good time to you, because having a good time is all we want to do here. And with that said, let's get started. First of all, it needs to be said, the whole game is in a 3D engine. This includes both the top screen and the bottom screen, though the fact that it's not a traditional 3D game does sometimes confuse the programming and the camera that I'm using. Typically what's going to happen here is I only get control of one screen, but it oftentimes prioritizes the one with the most amount of action. So it works out pretty well. But with that in mind, let's explain some more about how this all works. It seems that the environment is made up of several chunks, and while that doesn't really seem all that necessary in a 3D engine game, it's pretty significant here because what you can do with an environment that's made up of several chunks is that you can essentially have culling just outside the boundaries. And you can see that here as the character's moving around. As the camera is following Bowser, you can see that environments seem to disappear immediately from behind him and start to appear immediately as he's walking forward, which does really well to save on resources. Also, although it's very difficult to control this camera, tilting it allows me to show you the depth of how these sprites work. You can see that most of the sprites are just floating above the environment, pretty significantly too. And certain parts of the environment are also floating off of the flat palette. This is because some parts of the environment are supposed to be top layered, or in other words, allow your character to walk behind it in some way. And so lifting it off of the original image like this just allows the 3D sprite to literally be behind it. Whereas in past sprite games of old, had to do layer priority to give you the illusion of depth. You may also notice that there's nothing underneath any of these objects. Again, that's just a little bit of extra effort to make sure that this game is fully optimized. Obviously, the player's not supposed to see anything behind these objects, and so for it to not exist makes the game run that much better. It allows them to work with that much more. But even with that said, sometimes, in some cases, these objects that are made to be the background elements for these characters actually do have some artifacts that are outside the player's view. Like when you level up in the game, you might notice that there's this really nice looking spiraling pattern back here. Well, moving the camera will show you that these lines are working independently from the opposite red background. And so it's essentially one giant object that's just spinning around. And also the use of layers is also used on sprites, and that in itself has a myriad of really unusual looking stuff when you turn the camera behind certain characters. Like here with Bowser, you can see what he looks like front facing, but if you take the camera behind him, you can see that his eyes and that the inside of his mouth had a lower layer priority than the rest of his face. You can also see that since the hair is completely obscured by the shell, that the hair had a top layer priority. And by taking the camera back here, you can see the entire sprite that the developers made for the inside of his mouth and his eyes. And also the only reason why you can see these things is because the body of Bowser is only made up to a certain point. Otherwise, there's a big empty square that other objects get placed on top of. Also, I want to show you guys this really weird thing. I asked people on Twitter if they could figure out what's going on here. I couldn't figure it out. No one could really figure it out. The best answer I got was someone thought they were turn signals. This isn't always the case, but in this particular scene, when you turn the camera around on Bowser's sprite when his back is facing the camera, you can see two squares on the opposite side. Now these squares are definitely not used for anything that is going to be seen by the player. And so what they are is a complete mystery. Now let's talk about Midbus and Fawful. Now you can see here with Midbus, during battle, this is a side view of him, and it seems like a large part of his body is made here. There's an entire hump that you don't really get to see that's covered up by the shell at all times. In fact, they even highlighted it with a little bit of extra lighting here. It's pretty crazy that if someone took the time to remove the shell, you'd still have a complete Midbus body. And then unlike the other characters, when Midbus is viewed from the back, taking the camera around can show you that they used the front facing of his head as the back facing of his head. It's just that the shell covers it up just well enough that the only thing you can really see is the horns, which would look the same on both sides. And then once again, there's a sprite for the entire torso without the shell. It's very strange. You can even see the outline of where the shell should be. But yeah, let's go back to that previous clip. Fawful also uses layers. You can see that his robe has a full sprite without his head. Obviously, this is so that the head can animate without having to redraw the robe every single time. It's just surprising that it's the entire cloak. as if the head could come off at any point, but of course that's not the case. And then viewing Fall from the backside seems to have something interesting as well. Like if we take the camera over here and we look at his head from the front side, you can see that there's a lot more of his head that seems to be modeled than really necessary. And again, this is probably so that the head can bob while he's walking around or talking, but even then there is a considerable amount of head here that doesn't really need to be there. Pretty crazy. It almost looks like an egg on a pedestal. And also, here's something I thought that was really interesting. There's a couple times where Starlo is featured inside the word bubble, but I'm gonna guess that this was probably problematic for the team in some way, because when you move the camera, you can see that Starlo's on a completely different layer, and that the way that they pulled it off is that they made a cookie cut of all the frames of animation that Starlo has inside of the bubble, and then the sprite synchronizes with the cookie cut to pull this effect off. And now I want to tell you guys about some stuff that is hidden outside the boundaries that should have been in the game. So the first thing I want to show you guys that's completely unused content is here in this changing room. Now you see these curtains, they open and close, but even when they're open, there's a little detail that's hidden by the curtains. So manipulating the camera a little bit can show you that there is a clothes hanger in the upper right hand corner. Again, that's something you'll never be able to see by playing the game normally. Next up, you're going to see here that the developers don't get rid of things like HUD. Here on the main screen, if you look over to the left before you ever get to a part of the game where you're inside Bowser's body, you'll see the map for inside of Bowser's body. And you can see here with a later save file, this is how it's supposed to look once you finally do get inside of Bowser's body. But otherwise, it's stored off to the left here. Also, for one of Bowser's special moves here, you can see that he throws this ball of Goombas. And when he does that, the ball of Goombas stay off to the left-hand side. But better than that is that up above that ball is a stored-off graphic that's used for when the Goombas run into the enemy and does not get hit by the fire. And here in this scene with the crystal ball, you can see Bowser here. And I really wanted to show you all the layers that are involved to pull this scene off, because it's really cool. But that's not why I'm actually in the scene with you right now. I wanted to show you that further down on the same plane of existence are the health points for the Mario Brothers. And it should be stated that any given time in this game when you don't see the health, it's always stored out of bounds. But that's not even the most interesting part. Further down than that is another graphic that's used a little bit later after the battle with Bowser. And it's especially weird because the graphic that you do see later on is stored behind the star. Also, if you start the battle when you're this far out of bounds, the game is going to display random memory to you. And just for clarification here, what you're supposed to see is a graphical sweep that takes you from the overworld area into the battle area. Also, I thought this was a pretty funny thing involving layers. There's the minigame here where you can scratch the card and try to get a discount. If you flip the graphics around, you can see the position of all the items in the minigame, which I'm not a cheater, so don't worry, I'm not going to do that. And coming to the end of this episode, I'm starting to realize that I didn't have a whole lot of content for this week, and I feel kind of bad about that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share a video that I made for Game Explain like a year ago, and it's like a highlight reel of some of the best Nintendo discoveries I've ever made. If you've seen this already, thanks for watching, and remember, there's a link to the plush in the video description down below. I really hope that you check it out. Otherwise, enjoy! So one of the coolest secrets for Super Mario Bros. 3 was always just one step away from the player. In the throne rooms in the game, a little scene plays out where Mario sees a transformed king. However, you're never allowed to move around in this throne room, because if you could see an entire wall that's never been used in the game, which spans a really long distance. But rather than hurt your eyes, let's go directly above the throne room to show you something that is used by the game. That's right, the template for the letter that's used by Princess Peach at the end of every world is always sitting directly above the throne room in every single castle. Now let's take a step down from castles and talk about some mansions, specifically Luigi's mansion. This next thing I want to show you was a request from Andre himself, which I could see why. It's a legitimate cool bit that's just made easier to see by moving the camera towards it. In Professor Egad's Ghost Portrificationizer, there's an image of 3 ghosts sitting at a table, and believe it or not, there is a significance to this image, as footage for these 3 ghosts once existed in a Space World demo for the same game. However, in the final game, these 3 ghosts don't seem to exist anywhere, and this image on the screen is the last existing reference of them. Speaking of protagonists fighting evil by moonlight, this next thing is probably the most absurd trivia that you can mention to your friends. In Punch-Out for Wii, Piston Hondo in between rounds is reading a book of some kind. However, it would be very interesting to find out what it is he's reading. And despite the fact that you never get a great look at what it is, showing the pages on the inside show you something totally jaw-dropping. Because what you're looking at are panels for the Sailor Moon manga. The images are slightly edited to not have certain parts of dialogue, and the panels themselves are also rearranged in different ways. However, the artwork itself are real panels from the real Sailor Moon manga, making this discovery one cool book. And since we're on the subject of books, let's take ourselves over into Super Mario Sunshine. Inside the bottle of Noki Bay, there's an unused gameplay element that was sealed up by a door. Now this door and the contents inside no longer play any role in Super Mario Sunshine. However, taking the camera inside of this room can show you an unused book, which was likely part of the main objective for the original purpose of this area. However, it became coin collecting instead. But we're not out of the water just yet. One of the coolest things about Super Smash Bros. Melee is that in the Great Bay stage, there's a fully modeled interior to the laboratory. Now the reason for this is evidenced by beta footage that showed characters walking in and out of the laboratory, and when they would do that, it would dissolve the front wall. However, in the final version of this game, that idea was scrapped, leaving behind a relic of what used to be. Anyways, thank you very much everybody. I am a guest on this channel. My name again is She Says. You can type in Boundary Break on YouTube to find my show, and it's completely dedicated to trying to find out-of-bounds secrets like the one you saw just now. Hey, special thank you to Erwin Rommel, Stephen Olson, and The Great Beyond. All three of you showed major support over on Patreon, and I really appreciate that. And I also just want to say a big thank you to all the other patrons that have been supporting me during this difficult time. Hold on, 1 second, I gotta make sure I can't boundary break anything here. What? What? Oh my god! Oh my god! The game runs in a 3D engine! You gotta be kidding me! That's incredible!